Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, saying, boy, we'd love it if Howard Schultz would run. Is he right?
Well, look, I think that a lot of people have the politics on this all wrong. Howard Schultz is looking at this question of whether or not he should run for president and do so as a centrist independent because he loves this country. And he's very worried about the polarization and the impact that it's having on the national conversation and also the inability of Washington to actually get things done for the American people. So I think you've got Republicans saying one thing, you've got far-left Democrats saying another thing. Howard Schultz is out there just trying to listen to the American people and see if this is the right time for just such a candidacy.
And that is a really reasonable and principled reason to run. At the same time, do you think he has a path to win? Or is this more about making a statement and trying to change the discussion?
Well, that's what this process is all about. He hasn't said that he's running. He said that he's looking at running. And as he goes around the country and he talks to the American people and he listens to their concerns and he listens to what they have to say about whether or not they want a third choice, that's how he's going to help to make his decision on whether or not he ought to do this. He won't get into this race if he doesn't think there's a path to 270 electoral votes. But he is going to take a very hard look at it and see what it is that the American people are looking for. You know, when he picks up the paper and reads about, these purity tests, Cynthia Nixon going after Vice President Biden, the lists that are being made in the Democratic caucus, what's happening with Michael Cohen and President Trump, it's a mess. And he just thinks that the American people are looking for something that maybe isn't just on the far right or the far left.
Which may well be right, but you know the way the Constitution works so well, as a matter of just the statutes as well. Do you think he has any path to actually winning outright the Electoral College votes? Because if not, then it gets thrown to the House.
That's the question that he's trying to answer. But what I do know is that there are millions of Republicans who are dissatisfied with President Trump, but they don't have anywhere to go in this presidential election if the Democrats nominate someone like a Bernie Sanders, who they would never vote for. So in a race where you've got millions of disaffected people in both political parties without a third choice, that could lead to Donald Trump getting reelected. But it could also lead to a path to 270 electoral votes in states that are never really competitive. He's going to Texas this week. He was in Arizona right out of the box when he started this conversation. He's going to places that haven't been competitive because he thinks that that's where you're going to find a lot of people who are looking to actually have a voice and get engaged in this contest.
So you mentioned millions of people who are disaffected with President Trump. At the same time, there are millions of people who seem to be pretty committed to him. And we can put up numbers, actually, that shows that he's got like 40% locked up. And the question is, you're fighting over a relatively small piece of the pie.
I think that number is actually considerably lower than 40%, particularly when you look at a three-way test between a Democrat, President Trump, and a centrist independent. The other thing that I would say is if you look at the Wall Street Journal NBC poll that was out this weekend, something like 42% of Americans said that they wanted a third choice. Now, that's significant because it's a plurality of Americans, but also it's the highest number that it's been in 16 years since they've been asking that question. I think more and more as people look at what's happening in Washington and our broken politics, they're looking for another answer that's not just the far right or the far left.
As you know, Bill, it's a pretty crowded field already. It got even more crowded today as John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, announced that he was going to be running for president. Why doesn't a John Hickenlooper, to some extent, take up the position that Howard Schultz would be taking up?
Well, look, I think that you're going to have a range of Democrats who are in this fight who are anywhere from where Bernie Sanders is on free college and jobs and health care, where he is, and where John Hickenlooper is, where Joe Biden is. You'll have a whole range. But I think that this conversation is important right now as Howard considers whether or not he wants to run as a centrist independent, because people need to engage with the idea. They need to have a conversation about it, and they need to decide whether or not a third party is the right way to go for them. I don't know how the Democratic primary is going to end up. I think it's very hard for somebody who's more moderate to win that nomination, particularly when you look at the things that are at the center of the conversation right now, like the Green New Deal being a litmus test for Democrats or Medicare for all and things like that. I think that makes the path very difficult for folks in the moderate space. But, like everyone else, we'll see.
Well, as you suggest, I mean, we're going to have a Howard Schultz who's not going to buy into the Green New Deal, not going to buy into Medicare for all, not going to buy into President Trump's position on the other side. What is it in the center that he's for? What's the center of his policy position that would say this is why you should vote for me, not just I'm an alternative to these people you don't like?
I'm glad you asked that question. And actually, over the course of these next 2 weeks, one of the things that Howard's going to be doing is laying out what his centrist governing doctrine would be. And it would be a hard look at, with some granularity, at how he would govern were he president of the United States, if he decides to run and if he has the privilege of winning and being in that office. And he'll lay out exactly how he would do it. I don't want to give up any news right now, but the idea is essentially you take the best ideas from the right and from the left and you forge a path that makes sense for the American people. There is wide agreement in this country on where the American people are on things like health care, on guns, on a wide variety of things, but we can't get anything done because of the gridlock in Washington. And he's going to be laying out with some specificity how he takes those things on in these coming weeks.
I certainly understand and respect the fact you don't want to steal thunder from Howard Schultz. That's not your job. So without specifically saying what his policy is going to be, could you give me his top 3 priorities? He said, if I got to be president of the United States, these are the top 3 things on my to-do list that I would address.
Well, I would start with healthcare. He's someone who, as your viewers know and as you know, at Starbucks, he got healthcare to even part-time employees, which no other company of that scale had really done at that time. He knows that there's ways that we can do this, and it doesn't have to be Medicare for all. There are ways that companies have already shown leadership on this issue in doing. Our nation's security is, of course, of vital importance to him, particularly cybersecurity, when you look at all the different threats that we have right now. And then third, I would say, the education of our young people in this country. He's very concerned about education. When he was at Starbucks, as you may know, he helped to get college tuition for even part-time employees there as well. But starting a K through 12 education, going on to college, and then the lifelong learning that is required in the economy that we're in right now is crucially important to Howard and something that you'll be hearing a lot more about in coming weeks.